Well, it's a lovely sunny afternoon and I've just got enough time to have a bit of a waffle about these little bad boys, pole pots. Now, I've been having a little rummage through my tackle room trying to tidy it up. I'm determined to do some other videos in my tackle room, but until that's tidy, I ain't going in there to do any filming. So, but I found a tub of stuff and I thought, oh, that's not a bad thing to have a chat about actually. I did one on icebreakers, which seemed quite popular, surprisingly. So I try and do something a little bit more applicable to most of you out there. And pole pots is something I have a big affinity with and something I'm really passionate about and really sort of get stuck into the ins and outs and intricacies of pole pots. I'm always tinkering with pots, so I thought it'd be an ideal thing to have a bit of a chat about. Now here's a tub of pots and lids and all sorts of canisters and things that I've accumulated over the years. I love making pole pots and I love making things to do with fishing. Anything that helps me catch fish, I get a lot of satisfaction about making things myself, whether it's a float or a pot or just doctoring something and that I think is going to give me an edge. So that's what I do, and I've been doing it for years. I've always tinkered with pole pots. Back in the day, you had to make your own pole pots. So now there's brilliant actually shop bought ones that are absolutely spot on now, but back in the day you had to make your own if you wanted it to do its job. So I've got all sorts of pots in there. Just thought I'd show you. I've actually dug out and sort of tried to segment them into specific ones really. So I'll just show you some of the things we used to do. Now obviously that's the old Kinder Egg canister, and that was the holy grail of pole pots back in the day. There's still people using them now, but I don't think they're as good as what's out there now. But they were mega light, 2 pieces. You could put them on, it comes apart, you can put them on like that, just with a couple of holes. I used to put grommets in. I've tried to find the little washer grommets in that I used to use as well, but to be honest, without the grommets it was lighter and better anyway. But that's what we used to do, put them on, and to this day they're still reasonably useful. You can, because you put your pole through halfway up, you can put it as low down as you want, but if you put it halfway up, the hole's halfway up, that way you could actually wedge some bait under the pot, under the pole tip, and then put some more on top of the pole tip, and you could tap out the first lot and you still get a bit of a plug underneath because your hole was higher up. So actually it was quite useful. I've seen an MAP tried, I've got an MAP one somewhere where they actually sort of took that stage further, but to be honest I don't get on with that style of pot really. So I prefer one that's fixed towards the bottom and I can tell perfectly whether it's one way up or the other and everything. So but that's where a lot of us started off, with Kinder pots. Before that though, there was we used to, you know, the old just an aerosol lid, something like that was what we made a lot of our pole pots out of, and also shot canisters, little tubs for putting your shot in like that. I remember seeing something years and years and years back, Harry Billing, quite a famous angler, Harry Billing, doing something like this and putting that on the end of his pole and having like one little slit in, and that was his little sprinkle pot. That sort of, anything like that, I used to read all these articles and used to inspire me to try and make my own. So I tried that sort of system and it was okay. It wasn't ideal, but it was okay, and I could see why it was so successful for Harry. So the other things are this sort of pot. Do you remember this? That used to screw on. It's actually got a screw thread and you'd actually screw it onto your pole tip. God, that must have broke some pole tips, but not a very good system at all. That's an old Mabel one, but we've gone on so much further than that now. So but that's an old that we used to screw on, and back then you'd have the thinnest number 1 going and they would bend like that, and I don't know how we managed to cope with pots like that. Oh, and here's an obscure one. When I used to work on the magazine, when I was deputy editor of Match Fishing, before I became editor, we used to get sent in all sorts of weird things, and this one, I don't know if you can see, it's got a trap door. You could fill in one half or the other, or both, and then you could obviously fill one half and then you slide it that way and you could pot in the other. It was a very good idea, not very practical or a bit cumbersome and everything in the long run, but I thought that's an interesting one to show you. I've hung on to. So and then obviously all sorts of lids and things, that's what we used to use. more kinder pots, and then we messed around with bits of elastic, and you'd put that over the pole and then wrap this around once and it'd stay on, and that was an underhanging pole pot, but generally, like I say, I prefer it on the top now. I just find it's a better system for me. So there's some old sorts of pots. Oh, and this is another one. You can see that. That's the Stanjay screw adapter, and that is what we used to get an old pole pot, an aerosol drill hole in it, pop one of them in, and then you could thread that. Any sort of pole pot used to go on to that sort of thread, and you had your own homemade pole pot. So another thing that I've sort of hung on to for whatever reason, but God knows how old they are, but I'm sure nobody uses those anymore. So we pop them to one side, and then as things progressed, I sort of went on, probably this was my favourite pole pot for a very, very long time. That's the old Preston cad pot, very, very lightweight, just a nice little hole, medium size. You could cut it a little bit bigger if you wanted and all sorts, but that was great for sprinkling things, and you take the lid off, no problem. So that was a nice little system as well. But things have moved on, like I say. So, but also, I used to get a bit specialised with my pole pots. I remember seeing some features, I think it was the Liverpool Gaswise anglers fishing on the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, and everything was all sort of quite negative, and but really precise little tiny amounts of bait, little bits of slop, or 3 or 4 grains of hemp, or things like that. And I also saw someone making tiny little micro pots on the Oxford Canal, which was a bit closer to where I was fishing. That sort of inspired me, but basically to come up with some tiny little pots of my own. Something like that was a disc that people used to use for feeding slop, and you see that it's got a little bit of carbon there that I've put on and arrowdited it on, and you slide it onto a really skinny pole tip, and you'd be able to put slop or a pinch of joke or something on that tray and put it in. I didn't like that system, to be honest, but it's obviously hung onto it. Again, but the way the carbon sleeve slid on was lovely and snug, and you chose the right. It's just with old number ones, and you'd be able to slide those on, and you could feed all sorts in a pot like that. But what I was more interested in was the tinier pots. That's the old original Preston cad pot, and I used to use that for tiny amounts of slop. But again, that was too big for some of the winter fishing I was doing, and I used to hang on to all sorts of tiny lids and bits of plastic and stuff. Look at that, these tiny little things, absolutely tiny, and little lids and things, and I don't know where half this has come from, little bits of rubber and what have you. But what I came up with, remember the old Preston slip shot containers they used to put the shot in? Well, I used to chop the bottom off. I'll show you 2 here, and they're what I used to make. Try and hold one up to the camera. Tiny pot, a little bit of carbon on the bottom so it could slide on. That was a longer one that I made. Tiny, absolutely tiny. And all I was ever going to put in those was probably like 15-20 joker. Hello, cat. 15-20 joker, or a pinch of liquid ice bread, something like that in the winter. And wait, stop sniffing my camera, you. And that's what I used to use. So that was fantastic. Wait, I don't want to see that. Don't want to see. Come on, go on. Come on, off. He's obviously hungry or something like that, so someone's not feeding him. So yeah, that's what I used to use. Tiny little pots. Didn't get in the way. Didn't wrap over anything, so you didn't get tangles. The wind didn't catch it, and it was also quite discreet. You could feed a little pinch of bait, and no one was realising you were actually drip feeding your peg and actually catching roach off the deck and stuff. Wherever everyone else was just feeding a big dump of bait and refeeding every hour or half hour or whatever, I was going in and feeding a little pinch constantly, catching roach 5, 6, 8 inches off the deck with tiny little light rigs. It's worked for me a treat for years and years, joker fishing and bread fishing. And it's just a way a tiniest amount of bait in winter can spark those fish, and it's a way of feeding that's still applicable today with F1s and even carp and that in the winter. So these tiny little pots, I'll always hang on to them, but don't use them anymore. But there's other similar sort of ideas that I use later on now. So there's some little tiny, what I call my micro pots, which I used to use for all my canal fishing. We'll pop them to one side. And what else have we got? Oh, a massive thing for me. Took me a long time to get my head around pots with holes. I couldn't see the point. I thought it was a bit of a gimmick. I used to think, well, it was obviously just a gimmick for saving weight, which obviously it does a little bit, but I suppose the reason I was a bit averse to it to begin with was because I was fishing places like Woodland View and that, and we were actually cupping in neat liquid, sometimes using sponges and that in the pot as well to soak up some liquid, but actually cupping in red liquid, normally corn steep liquor and red dye and things like that. We used to catch no end of carp shallow and on the deck feeding red liquid, mostly red. I've tried all sorts, but red. On black used to work shallow fishing as well, as a couple of anglers made a bit of a name for themselves, cupping in all this black liquid and then fishing shallow over the top. So I couldn't see why I'd want a pot with holes in. Things have really moved on now, and I realised that I tried the old frenzy pots, and that's where the penny dropped really. Nothing, I can't get anything to empty out of these pots. They create a massive, horrible vacuum. If you put in something like meat or pellets in, and soft pellets, and put them in just a little bit too firmly, go like that, and they will not come out. You end up breaking your pot tapping it so hard because of the vacuum that's created, and that's when the penny drop. I see a few other people saying, oh no, you need pots with holes and that, but it took me ages to get my head around that. And as soon as I started nipping a few holes in the bottom of these pots, it made all the difference. So there's some of my matrix ones that I've drilled, my old matrix ones that I've drilled little holes in the bottom. Anything to just get rid of that vacuum, and your pot just empties. So it was a nice idea, but it wasn't right for me. So those pots. But finally I realised feeding anything, as long as it wasn't too liquidy or anything that could crawl through those holes, I'm a massive fan of pots with holes in now, and also because you can dip the bait and the bait will cling to the pot and everything like that. So I ended up drilling holes in all my old pots. I've got a little frenzy one there that I drilled in, tiny frenzy one. You can see the little holes there. And I've been out, and when I'm coaching with people and they've got these sort of styles of pots, I end up chopping some holes in them with scissors, and the difference it makes is massive. Your pot just empties properly every time. So and also the old fruit chute lid as well. So just the top of a water bottle or a drinks bottle or a fruit chute bottle, again, popping some little holes in it makes all the difference. Now I'm still, as you can see there, I'm still a massive fan of little pots, especially sort of winter and spring, when that amount of micro pellets on a snake lake in particular is ample for catching 100 pounder F1s. Feeding that amount of micros each time, you could probably get 30-40 micros in there, no problem. Excuse me. And if you feed any more than that, you're overfeeding the peg. Yes, you could half fill a bigger pot, but actually the way it clings in and the way it empties and the way it doesn't bounce out and everything, it's better to choose the right size of pot for the amount of bait you want to feed, I found, rather than sort of half filling a bigger pot. So I went to that sort of stage. I messed around with these guru pots, which have got the sprinkle lids and everything, but what I ended up doing, I actually chopped them down, and that worked quite well. Again, filling it full of holes, but that was just the right amount. And for several months of the year, I don't want to feed any more micros than what goes in a pot like that. So things have moved on even further now. Now we've got the actual Matrix Flexi Tough Spots, which are exactly the same size, really neat, and I prefer that sort of domed end as well. Nothing's going to catch on that, and it's a much smoother exit point as well, so nothing's going to get caught in the top and that, so everything just comes out nice and easily, and you've got the holes in the bottom there as well. So that's where sort of we've progressed from the fruit chute to the cut down guru to actually the Matrix one now. That's what I use now, and they're absolutely ideal. And obviously what you've got now is the ability to add a little extender ring as well, so you can actually, if you do want to feed a little bit more bait, you can just pop them on and make them a little bit taller as well. So but that's the ultimate now as far as I'm concerned, these little tiny pots. So and I suppose if I did get some more extreme winter again, I could chop the top ring off, and might even find myself doing that next winter if it becomes really hard. But by then, to be honest, I'm more likely to be moving on to, I'll tell you what we'll do next. We'll we'll move on to my sort of sprinkle style pots, which is what I use for maggot fishing specifically. Now, I think it's my mate Joe Carras came up with the idea of this sort of system, which is that's just some pole elastic in there. And I took it a bit further with my own pots, and I called them cat's cradle. I don't know if it was me or Joe that ended up calling them cat's cradle pots, but I ended up putting, that one's broken, but this sort of mesh system was fantastic for stopping maggots in particular bouncing out. It works well with 6mm pellets as well, maybe 4s, but specifically for maggot fishing in the winter, I've made no end of these pots. They sink like bricks if they ever knock one in the water. They just go dum and sink, so that's not very good for that. But I took it a stage further. Oh, I got some Wee product lids, and they actually fitted on some of my old things. These are made by Wee products, and that sort of, you can see they've all broken now, and that they weren't bad actually. They weren't bad for helping stop your maggots bouncing but still being out of control. What I want to do is feed 2, 3, 4 maggots. I actually count them out, and by really inhibiting the amount that can come out at a time by this sort of system, or the mesh and that, you can really control the amount. This style of lid, that's the matrix lid there, that's fantastic, really good. But actually the only problem I found is in the depths of winter, when I only want to feed 1, 2, 3 maggots, they can all fall out if you're not careful. So it's good for sort of more sort of generous feeding, but actually I took it a stage further. You see that? I put a mesh, that's pole elastic, and you can see the difference in the hole size there. I can actually control the amount of maggots that are coming out more, but you can still pull it to the side and fill it nice and easily as well. So that's what I've done there with, and I've even done it with the tinier lids as well. So I can absolutely control the amount of maggots that are coming out, just 1, 2, 3 at a time. I wouldn't use them any other time than sort of, I don't know, December, January, February time, but that sort of style of lid is really good for that. It's also good for shaking out 4mm pellets and that, but to be fair, so's the conventional lid as well. So but that's where I am with that. So and that's one of the original matrix lids as well, and actually this is before the matrix pots came out. I came up with a system where you could actually pull it to one side and fill it, so that was quite nice. And a little trick as well I do in the winter is I'll probably have 2 or 3 of these pots on the go, and whilst I'm fishing, obviously you're waiting for a bite a bit more in winter, I'll take it off and I'll just fill it, have it in the tub, and just fill it with one-handed, and then as soon as I've caught a fish or I have to ship back, I'll just swap the pot over and then go back out again. So I've got a ready filled pot. Actually putting one pot on and taking another one off is actually quite a nice little time saving exercise actually that I've sort of settled on. So I don't see anyone else do that, but it's something I've played around with the last 3-4 winters, and it's actually quite a nice little system there. So so that's me sort of maggot sprinkly winter pots. Put them over there. The other style of sprinkle pot I've got, which I've played around with for a very long time, they're the original fox toss pots, and they had too many holes in. Everything was, if you was feeding micro pellets in these, too many pellets would fall out. I only want to tap in like 4, 5, 6 pellets at a time, so I was taping up the top, and just to inhibit the amount that were coming out. But the other thing I came up with, I went out, used to go out of Alan Scott one every month and do features with him, and he came up with some pots similar to this, but I sort of went down my own route really, with a little bit of a lid that you could just sprinkle out bait with a lid, like a lidded sort of pot, but with the elasticated system. I came up with this. You can literally pull it to one side and it would fill it up and it'd go straight back just by cutting the rim off and everything. So I used to mess around with that, and just basically purely for sprinkling micro pellets, again in the winter, in the spring. And I've tried all sorts of combinations of this. I tried the Garbellino ones that I got, but it didn't quite like the shape or anything of those. So but that's something I was toying with, and other ones like that. But it was more about, I could tilt it like that and then the lid would go straight back on as well. So something I used to really sort of play around with. I spent ages messing around working out where to drill the holes and the elastic and everything. So that's another thing I used to do, and that's another one as well, a taller pot with a bit of an old maggot feeder on the end, and that used to just, because it was rounded, it just popped back each time. and you could even put a little bit of bait in that top bit as well if you wanted. Now that brings me on to something Mark Roger from the east, I think it's Grimsby way, top angler. He showed me a pot that was along those lines, and me being a pole potaholic, I thought it was really clever. Basically, you've got a normal pot, but then you've got a deeper pot on top as well, normally a fruit chute lid. Again, you could feed a plug of bait there, but what you got a hole in the top, so once that plug of bait in that compartment had emptied, you'd still got the ability to sprinkle bait with the bottom pot. So that's quite a little nifty device. I came up with a few little variations on that. There's one with a Preston, one with a little single hole. It's not, I think I've broken that a little bit now, but that was a really nice little sort of system that actually worked really well. It's quite specialised. There's not many occasions where I want to actually do feed a plug and then sprinkle over the top, but yeah, you could do it with pinkies, and you can do it with micro pellets mostly, or a little plug of ground bait now. But actually there's a bit of mileage in that. I actually showed Preston Innovations that pot after doing the feature with Mark Roger, and they actually did bring out something along those lines pretty soon after, but they didn't quite get it right, I don't think. But it was the idea was there, and I think that's quite clever, a way of feeding a plug of bait, a ball of ground bait, or a little larger amount of micros, and still having the facility to drip afterwards. Not a bad idea that I'm still playing with to this day. So that's that. And then, but to be honest, I think we've covered them all now. I am more than happy with mostly, to be honest, that medium matrix flexi toss spot is where we're at now. It's height. I can have it at that sort of height, or I can have the extender and have it a bit taller, and 3 sizes. I do a lot of big pot fishing. I haven't got the bigger one with me, the little bigger mesh pot. This size pot, when I'm margin fishing, I'll use the biggest size pot a lot. When I was at Drennan, we was having a big discussion about kidding the pots. People said, no, you just want that and a little pot. And I said, well, no, actually, I use a great big pot all the time. And they said, no, nobody uses those. I said, well, everyone in that room just fish snake lakes or F1s. So if you go to places like Decoy Lakes, or you go to Willinghurst Fishery or Hayfield or whatever, then people do feed larger amounts of bait, believe it or not, for bigger carp. So so I use the bigger size pot a hell of a lot all through the summer. And sometimes even that's not quite big enough. So the bigger size pot, very useful as well. If you only ever fish snake lakes and commercials, and snake lakes and F1 venues, then probably the small and the medium pot are all you'll need. But I use the big pot a hell of a lot on anywhere where there's big carp about, especially. Sometimes for F1s, but with feeding ground bait and stuff, but generally the 2 smaller ones, if you're just after smaller fish and silverfish, they're all you need. But don't ignore the bigger pot, because they come in very useful. But that brings us nicely onto paste pots. Now, I've messed around with paste pots all for God knows how long, and we used to use elastic systems to get them on the pot, and you could slide them as far back as you wanted there. There's another one we did, look for little amounts, bit of elastic on the bottom, and that would slide down, but they wobble, and never quite happy with those. Similarly, I've got the old Frenzy one there, that just was never happy with that. Again, I think it's down to the fact it hadn't got the holes in, so things wouldn't empty properly, plus it would sort of go like that while she was fishing. The old Andy Finley style, these are discontinued, I'm pretty sure now. The paste style pots, I've just got a load of those. They're still useful, that little funnel at the top to help bring everything in. But what people, when these matrix toss pots first came out, I think I was the first one to say to Sean when he came out of him, says, do you realise you can put more than one extender ring on the top? And he didn't have a clue about that, and he didn't. It's just more of a happy coincidence than anything. But you can keep putting extender rings on the top to make a tall paste pot. So I say, until I showed a few people, look, you can put 3 rings on, much taller pot. So until I showed a few people, they hadn't even dawned on them that they could make a nice paste pot out of them. But to be fair, Sean doesn't do any paste fishing that I'm aware of anyway, so it probably wouldn't have even sprung to his imagination. But so that's a useful little thing as well. I'm also, but as you can see, because of the amount of bait you can get it's a similar to the amount of Preston. Actually get a little bit more in that. I sometimes want even more bait in, and that's why I still use an aerosol lid for a lot of my paste fishing. You can put your paste in, great big balls of paste if you want, but you can also put smaller bits of paste in and fill it to the brim with feed as well. So I'm a massive fan of an aerosol lid for my paste fishing still, because you can get so much more bait in than some of these other pots. And this is my summer pot bag that I carry. I have got these. I've got the bigger pots as well. I still don't tend to use these very much, the jumbo pots that Guru and Preston do, but I still carry one of each. And they're also useful if ever you forget your cupping kit, or if you're coaching and someone hasn't got a cupping kit, you can pop these on and let them feed larger amounts. So I always carry these, but to be honest, I don't find myself using them. I'd rather come back with a bigger pot, fill in, and by the time I've gone back out, but I don't draw pegs enough where maybe after 300 or 400 pounds. Honestly, I don't draw those sort of pegs anymore. So then these sort of pots, feeding and dropping it straight on top might be the way, but generally when I'm feeding that amount of bait, I'm more than happy to go out with a big cupping kit, pot in, come back, bait up. By the time you've gone back out, they're on it and you can catch them. So that little pause isn't a problem. So, but they're the paste pots I'll generally use. I have got some of the other ones, they're Preston ones in there as well. But generally, this is my sort of big pot, summer paste pot sort of thing. And again, put some holes in your pots in the bottom just to help everything escape. But generally, these cheap aerosol lids, I've probably had these 8 years now, and they're still going strong. Great big holes in them, so you can push them right down your pole if you need to. And they're what I use for my paste fishing. I do a lot of paste fishing, more than people realise. So helped win me the UK champs one year. So and also, but that's where we are now. This is the pot that I generally put in with my bait bag, and a little tub of just basically I generally have 4 or 5 of each size of the Matrix Flexi Toss pots. That is my go-to pot range now. I don't have to go in through all this. This is I'm more than happy to use these. These are absolutely spot on and ideal, and it's basically a culmination of all this sort of tinkering around that people like myself and people have been doing over the years. We've gone from that to that, or actually we've gone from that to that, and now we've got a bespoke, nice, light, holes in the bottom, perfectly aerodynamic or aquadynamic, or just nice and smooth streamlined pot with holes and lids that we can make as tall or as shallow as we want. And that's where we are now, and that is what I generally carry. So hopefully you like my little waffling on. I put quite a lot of waffling on about pole pots, but hopefully it might have sparked a few of your imagination as well about little things like this that we used to do, and daft pots like this you might remember reading about in magazines and that. But this is where we are now, and I can't see them getting much better than this.